Have you ever witnessed an entire town standing firm against what seemed like unstoppable bullies? One of the most thrilling moments in this tale happens when a single, perfectly aimed warning shot rattles an entire gang of bikers, revealing the quiet power of Redwood Valley's toughest defender. It's a moment that shows courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the unwavering resolve behind a rifle scope or the collective will of everyday people who refuse to be bullied. If you're curious about how this clash unfolds and whether the determined farmers of Redwood Valley can truly overcome such dangerous foes, stick with us until the very end. Trust me, you won't want to miss a second of the final showdown. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to Farmer's Story. Your support means a lot, and it helps us bring more incredible tales straight to you. Now let's dive in and see how it all comes together. Eliza Parker dabbed at the heat gathering on her brow while arranging a neat row of glistening peppers at the Redwood Valley Farmers Market. She took her time, recalling how she had once been a literature professor in Denver before marrying Jonathan Parker, who had served in the Army's 3rd Special Forces Group. After witnessing too much conflict overseas, he'd wanted a quiet life tilling fields rather than scanning battlefields. People strolling through Redwood Valley might see only fresh produce and smiling neighbors, unaware that Jonathan's steady demeanor came from years of high-stakes missions. That morning, chatter rippled among the market stalls. A biker group calling themselves the Steel Serpents had been spotted. They weren't typical weekend riders. Locals whispered that they carried an air of discipline, possibly ex-military. Despite Redwood Valley's peaceful reputation, the atmosphere felt charged with hidden apprehension. Yet business continued. Fresh loaves at the bakery, jars of jam, baskets of berries. Children raced about, laughter echoing under the bright sky. Eliza tried to project calm, but she noticed other vendors frequently glancing over their shoulders. Rosalind Fletcher, a loyal customer, broke Eliza's thoughts. "Any word on these new visitors?" she asked, picking through tomatoes. Eliza shrugged, faking a nonchalance she didn't entirely feel. The truth was Jonathan had quietly cautioned her about the newcomers, encouraging folks to remain vigilant without appearing hostile. He reminded them that Redwood Valley was a place built on trust, and that trust was worth defending. Across town, Jonathan worked on an irrigation pump in a converted barn that served as his workshop. Though he'd turned soldiering skills into farming know-how, he remained keenly alert. He had overheard rumors describing the Steel Serpents' penchant for intimidation. He recognized patterns of coordination in their arrival, how they rode in tight formation, scanning the roads and vantage points. Some called them mere thugs on bikes, but Jonathan suspected deeper training. As Eliza weighed vegetables for a handful of regulars, a thunderous rumble announced the Serpent's entrance. More than a dozen motorcycles glided into the gravel lot, engines dominating the quiet. At the forefront was Axel, the Blade Blackthorn, a tall figure with cold eyes, stepping off his bike like a ruler inspecting new territory. In seconds, Redwood Valley's usual buzz faded into a tense hush. Parents tugged children close, while long-time locals exchanged concerned glances. Sheriff Hayes, slight but stern, eased toward Axel, scanning the group with caution. Axel grinned in a way that made Eliza's stomach knot. "Morning," he drawled, surveying the booths. "We heard this town is warm and welcoming." The quiet that followed hinted at a test of Redwood Valley's resolve. Within moments, the bikers split up, examining stalls in a way that felt more like scoping out defenses than shopping. Eliza saw Jonathan's silhouette near the orchard stall, his posture calm, but eyes sharp. They'd prepared for trouble, though she hoped Redwood Valley's unity would triumph before real violence took hold. For a few moments, the bikers simply roamed, picking up trinkets and produce with casual contempt. Sheriff Hayes approached Axel with a forced smile, trying to diffuse tension. "You folks passing through?" Axel shrugged. "Maybe, or maybe we'll stay a while. Town like this can use some extra security." His tone left no doubt he wasn't talking about legitimate law enforcement. Henry Dawson, a dairy farmer who often helped at Eliza's stall, whispered that he recognized the Serpents from an incident in another county. Farmers forced to pay protection fees under threat. Eliza recalled Jonathan speaking of men who exploit fear to gain control, counting on communities to back down. Redwood Valley wasn't a place that frightened easily, But the bikers were clearly different from simple hooligans. They had purposeful movements, scanning angles like soldiers. Axel's presence was particularly unsettling. He strolled through the market, knocking over the occasional crate, stepping on dropped fruit. Sheriff Hayes, who usually dealt only with minor disturbances, found himself choosing his words carefully, never fully turning his back on the new arrivals. Local folks shrank from the bikers' stares, yet a line of silent resolve was forming, subtle but unbroken. Eliza kept her composure. When one heavily tattooed serpent reached for the money box on her table, she moved it aside with quiet firmness. "We keep our own accounts here," she said. He smirked, but didn't press further. Meanwhile, Jonathan slipped into the background, gauging how many of the bikers appeared trained. His sharp gaze fell on a wiry man with a scar beneath his eye, who constantly signaled the others with quick head nods. Jonathan recognized it as a practiced teamwork. These weren't amateurs. At one stall, a biker toppled jars of honey, sending glass and amber liquid everywhere. Instead of cowering, the vendor calmly began cleaning up, while onlookers helped. Axel observed, perhaps expecting fear or pleas, but Redwood Valley didn't yield. The hush that followed was thick with tension. Sheriff Hayes, seeing the vandalism, inched closer. "You'll pay for that," he said quietly. Axel chuckled, tapping his boot in the sticky mess. "We'll see," he replied. Eliza exchanged a glance with Jonathan, and she could almost hear his unspoken words. "No sudden moves, but don't let them run us over." Redwood Valley was known for neighborly cooperation, and in that moment, the entire town seemed to move with a shared purpose, restoring order, refusing to bow. Axel's men muttered among themselves, some smirking, others growing frustrated. The lines were drawn, though no one had openly declared battle. Eliza knew Redwood Valley had to prepare for a more serious showdown. The quiet was fragile, like a glass shield between them and the gang's pent-up aggression. By noon, the Steel Serpents had scattered around Redwood Valley, gauging more than the market. A few rode out to the older warehouses near the train tracks. Others cruised by farms on the outskirts, casually surveying fields and machinery. Jonathan believed they were gathering intel for a bigger operation. Redwood Valley, small but strategically located, could be a conduit for whatever illicit goods they trafficked. The farmland offered cover, and the roads provided discreet access to highways. Deeply unsettled, Eliza joined a makeshift council at the Parker farm. Sheriff Hayes, Henry Dawson, and Harriet Graham, a retired teacher with a sharp eye, gathered to discuss next steps. Jonathan spoke in measured tones. "They're more than bikers. Some have discipline from formal training. I've seen the way they set up perimeter watches, how they communicate with subtle gestures. We can't treat this like a random gang." Hayes nodded, removing his hat. "I've requested backup from state police, but they're stretched thin. We can't just wait around if these guys escalate." Eliza's heart pounded. She recalled the stories Jonathan told of villages overseas forming local defenses, quietly, methodically. Redwood Valley might have to do the same. Already, volunteers were stepping up. Hank Billings, a Navy vet, offered to coordinate a community watch. Harriet suggested using the high school's old radio equipment for broader communication if cell signals got jammed. Though Redwood Valley had never needed such measures, no one hesitated now. At dusk, Jonathan and Henry drove around the perimeter, noting vantage points and possible chokeholds. The winding dirt roads and thick orchard groves could work in Redwood Valley's favor if they had to keep out unwelcome visitors. Meanwhile, Eliza passed along quiet instructions. "Be discreet, don't provoke the serpents, but keep eyes open." She also worked with Harriet to contact neighbors, sharing a simple message: Redwood Valley stands united. Later that evening, silhouettes of the Steel Serpents flickered in the distance. Their new base seemed to be an abandoned shipping depot. Henry reported seeing more bikes gathered there, along with crates that might hold weapons. Sheriff Hayes posted deputies at key intersections, but Redwood Valley lacked a sizable police force. If the Serpents advanced, it would be up to the townsfolk, guided by Jonathan's knowledge, to withstand them until outside help arrived. Around midnight, a handful of watchers patrolled. At Harriet's suggestion, they used a rotating schedule so no single spot would be unguarded. Eliza manned the radio at home, ensuring a calm, reassuring voice. Though fear haunted everyone, Redwood Valley's spirit remained unbroken. In a hushed exchange at the end of the night, Jonathan and Eliza stood by the barn, where he kept old gear from his service days. We may have to do more than show presence, he warned, voice low. Liza nodded, feeling the weight of their quiet farmland. She glanced at the dark shapes of her tomato rows, thinking how much was at stake. Redwood Valley's future might hinge on whether they could face down the Steel Serpents brand of brutality. Neither she nor Jonathan planned to let their home be taken without a fight. Sunrise brought a fragile normalcy. The market opened as usual, though fewer families lingered. Sheriff Hayes parked his cruiser in plain sight, a reminder of official presence. Eliza arranged her produce, determined to keep Redwood Valley's heartbeat steady. Across the way, Harriet Graham offered eggs and quietly asked if Eliza had seen any more suspicious activity. Not yet, Eliza murmured, but they're out there. She was right. Ursel and his men arrived mid-morning with cold precision. They rumbled in, parked with practiced spacing, and scanned the crowd. Axel headed straight for the produce area, ignoring the sheriff's watchful glare. "Still no interest in our protection?" he asked Eliza with mocking politeness. Jonathan approached, removing gloves stained by farm work. "Towns never needed that kind of help. We handle ourselves." Axel's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I hear you're ex-military," he said softly. "Bet you know the value of alliances." Jonathan offered a slight shrug. "Alliances are based on trust, not threats." The tension between them was palpable. Eliza noticed a few serpents edging closer, as if waiting for a signal. The potential for violence buzzed like an electric current. Still, Redwood Valley residents continued buying and selling, refusing to scatter despite the gang's presence. Suddenly, a commotion near the bakery stall drew everyone's attention. One of Axel's men shoved an elderly vendor, sending loaves tumbling. The vendor cried out, fear flitting across his face. Axel glanced over, but didn't intervene. Sheriff Hayes moved in, only to be blocked by two bikers who stepped in front. "Hold on, Sheriff," they said, hands near their waistbands. It was a brazen show of force. For a charged moment, it looked as though fists or weapons might fly. Yet Redwood Valley's watchers shifted too. Henry Dawson stood by with a stiffened posture, Harriet discreetly taking cover, aiming a watchful eye. Eliza clenched her jaw. She found herself remembering Jonathan's training philosophy. Real strength is quiet and measured, not loud. So Redwood Valley held its collective breath, restraining the urge to lash out. Axel broke the standoff with a casual wave. "We're not here to kill anyone," he announced, "but we do want respect." The word hung heavy, a twisted echo of courtesy. Then, as if bored, he signaled his men to stand down. The group dispersed among the stalls again, their presence a cloud overshadowing the day. Stepping closer to Eliza, Jonathan whispered, "They're testing us, seeing how far they can push." She agreed, eyes flicking to Harriet, who was already coordinating folks to quietly assist the injured vendor. Redwood Valley's communal support kicked in, showing unity in the face of intimidation. The bikers watched, likely confused by the refusal to crumble. In that moment, Eliza realized Redwood Valley's true power lay in its collective heart, stubborn, unyielding, and ready to defend what it cherished. Still, the day's tension hinted the serpents might escalate further if refused. She hoped Redwood Valley's faith in Jonathan's skills would be enough. Each day, the Steel Serpents became bolder. They demanded contributions from local businesses, promising dire consequences for refusal. Some farmers reported nighttime vandalism, cut fences, damaged crops. Rumors circulated of stolen livestock and frightened families. But Redwood Valley continued to coordinate. Sheriff Hayes documented each incident, though he knew arrests without immediate backup could trigger a confrontation the town wasn't ready for. Jonathan, meanwhile, refined a strategy built on lessons from his Special Forces days. He spoke with Harriet and Henry, mapping Redwood Valley into small districts. Each district had watchers, who used old walkie-talkies to report unusual movements. Messages were kept short and coded, in case the serpents tried eavesdropping. Farm equipment was rearranged to block certain roads discreetly, while orchard paths were narrowed with brush piles. "We're not setting traps to start a fight," Jonathan emphasized, "but we need to be ready to slow them down if it comes to that." Eliza continued her daily market routine, greeting neighbors with a calm smile. Beneath the surface, everyone felt the friction of uninvited eyes trailing their every move. Axel's men would saunter by, smirking or making veiled threats. Once, a biker flipped open a knife in front of Eliza, slicing into a tomato on her stall. She met his gaze, refusing to show fear. He walked away laughing, but she saw frustration in his eyes. Redwood Valley's resolve wasn't cracking. Beyond the market, Jonathan scouted near the old warehouse the Serpents used as a base. He spotted extra bikes, plus a couple of trucks bearing out-of-state plates. Axel was planning something big, perhaps establishing Redwood Valley as a transit hub for contraband. Jonathan noted how the Serpents patrolled the perimeter, setting up something akin to a forward operating post. Breaking them might require more manpower than Redwood Valley had. Still, local resilience was surprising. Hank Billings set up a small boathouse on the river as a hidden muster point. Harriet prepared the school gym as a fallback shelter, and farmers like Henry braced for the worst by storing extra feed and medical supplies. Eventually, mild confrontation turned to overt aggression. One afternoon, a serpent cornered Henry, demanding a cut from his dairy sales. When Henry refused, the biker smashed milk bottles and threatened him with a pistol. Townspeople intervened, forming a protective ring. The serpent backed off, swearing they'd regret crossing him. As he roared away, Henry's hands shook, but he declared he'd never pay a dime of hush money. News of that incident spread quickly, igniting a fresh wave of communal determination. Redwood Valley might be small, but it refused to break under tyranny. Jonathan updated his defense plan, stepping up watch schedules. Each household received a set of guidelines, from securing livestock at night to maintaining minimal lights to avoid easy targeting. Though the tension wore everyone thin, a sense of camaraderie flourished. Redwood Valley, once naive to such threats, was learning how to stand firm, harnessing both community spirit and a retired sniper's expertise. Twilight crept in, and Redwood Valley braced for a shift from petty threats to potential violence. The Serpents, unhappy with slow progress, ramped up their displays of force. Axel rode around with a grim expression, flanked by men carrying firearms in visible holsters. Sheriff Hayes, outnumbered, could only warn them about open carry laws. "Relax, Sheriff," Axel sneered. "We're just exercising our rights." Jonathan knew the real challenge would come under darkness, when intimidation evolved into clandestine moves. He spent nights patrolling back roads, often accompanied by Hank Billings or Henry Dawson. They watched for suspicious vehicles or signs of sabotage. On 2 occasions, they caught Serpents cutting fences or siphoning fuel, only to vanish before Hayes could arrive. Each incident hardened Redwood Valley's resolve. Families locked doors, but they also sharpened their willingness to resist. Eliza manned the radio from the Parker farm, her calm voice a lifeline for watchers calling in sightings of lurking bikers. She noted the times, patterns, and directions. Meanwhile, Harriet Graham established a network of hidden vantage points around town. The school rooftop, the orchard watchtower, and an old grain silo. Volunteers like Dr. Ingrid Fowler offered medical help if matters escalated. Redwood Valley was transforming from a gentle rural hamlet into a vigilant, tight-knit defense unit. One moonless night, Jonathan slipped out to reconnoiter the Serpents' warehouse again. A single lantern burned inside. Peering through a gap in the rusted siding, he saw crates stamped with cryptic symbols that suggested contraband. A handful of bikers chatted about shipment schedules and cuts, referencing Redwood Valley as an ideal distribution route. Jonathan's suspicion was confirmed. This wasn't random extortion. They aimed to entrench themselves for organized crime. The next day, Redwood Valley woke to find the main road blocked by 2 Serpents. They demanded a toll from any vehicle. Furious residents refused to pay, leading to a tense standoff until Sheriff Hayes arrived. Though the bikers moved aside, they gloated that Redwood Valley was already under their thumb. Jonathan stood nearby, fists clenched. He wouldn't let Redwood Valley become a lawless stronghold. That afternoon, Axel singled out Jonathan in a nearly deserted market. "You're a soldier, right? You know how it is. Strength rules." Jonathan met his gaze, unwavering. "Real strength protects, it doesn't oppress." Axel snorted, stepping closer. "Don't preach at me. Redwood Valley either cooperates or suffers." The unspoken threat hung between them. Eliza, watching from her stall, recalled how Jonathan always said bullies crumble when they face unbreakable unity. But she also sensed that Axel was more than a mere bully. He was cunning, with enough discipline to orchestrate a coordinated strike. Across Redwood Valley, families quietly stocked pantries, replaced flimsy locks, and charged their radios. Sheriff Hayes doubled patrols. The vibe was akin to waiting for a storm. Everyone sensed the gathering thunder. And in his barn, Jonathan carefully checked an old rifle he had hoped never to use again. He placed it aside, reminding himself that Redwood Valley would never fire first. But they wouldn't stand by if the Steel Serpents tried to seize their home. In time, Redwood Valley reached a breaking point. Axel, frustrated by the town's resistance, arranged a demonstration of force early one morning. Engine roars echoed through the streets as a convoy of serpents rolled in, headlights glaring against the dawn sky. They parked in a wide semicircle around the main market, corralled there by Redwood Valley's layout. Axel stepped forward, flanked by Cal Viper Donovan and several other hardened bikers. Each wore an expression of grim intent. Vendors stood at their stalls, refusing to pack up. Eliza and a handful of neighbors caught sight of Jonathan's silhouette on a nearby rooftop, scanning the scene below. Sheriff Hayes emerged, heart pounding, aware his deputies were outnumbered. Axel's voice rang out in the silence. Time's up. Redwood Valley either starts cooperating or faces consequences. The quiet tension was palpable. A mother pulled her child behind her, vendors swallowed their fear, and watchers took position behind crates or in hidden corners. Cal Donovan stepped forward, brandishing a list of so-called protection fees. He read out names of businesses, farmers, store owners, crafters, and demanded sums that could cripple them. Gasps punctuated the hush when each figure was announced. A couple of serpents moved among the stalls, upending boxes of produce, pulling down hanging signs. When one biker kicked over a crate of tomatoes, the sharp spatter across the cobblestones seemed to amplify the standoff. Trying to hold the peace, Hayes lifted a hand. This has gone far enough. Put away your weapons and no one needs to get hurt. Axel's contempt was clear. Sheriff, you're out of your league. I've got men ready to block off every road, burn fields if we don't get paid. Maybe you want to see Redwood Valley in ashes? The threat settled like a chill over everyone, yet Redwood Valley refused to scatter. Dr. Ingrid Fowler, who'd come to check on an elderly patient, stood resolute, arms folded. Henry Dawson edged closer to Eliza, bracing for what might happen. Harriet Graham, hidden from sight, quietly steadied her rifle, ensuring no serpent could advance without reckoning. Jonathan studied the bikers' formation. They were confident, believing fear alone would open Redwood Valley's wallets. He recognized their posture from countless conflicts abroad, conquerors swaggering into a village they presumed powerless. But Redwood Valley was not helpless. If violence erupted, Redwood Valley had vantage points, watchers, and the element of unity. When Axel demanded money from an older craftsman and elbowed him in the ribs, something in the crowd snapped. A murmuring wave of disapproval coursed through onlookers. Axel glared, daring them to do something. Sheriff Hayes repeated, "Stop!" But the bikers laughed, feeding on intimidation. Eliza felt her heart thump. She glanced toward Jonathan's hidden vantage, receiving a subtle signal to stay calm. The situation was reaching its flashpoint. Redwood Valley had quietly prepared for a potential last stand, though no one wanted bloodshed. The question was, would Axel force it? Suddenly, a shot cracked the air. Everyone froze, expecting the worst. Instead, the bullet struck the ground near a biker's boots, throwing gravel in a sharp spray. It was a warning shot, delivered with surgical precision. Heads snapped toward the hill where Jonathan had positioned himself. Axel's eyes widened, reading the message. Redwood Valley had a skilled marksman who could have aimed for flesh or bone, but chose a warning instead. The bikers tensed, some raising their weapons. Sheriff Hayes shouted, "Hold your fire!" His voice trembled with urgency. A single misstep could plunge them into chaos. But Redwood Valley had planned carefully. Henry and Harriet sprang into positions that flanked the bikers, rifles at the ready, ensuring no easy escape routes. Farmers with hunting shotguns emerged from behind trucks. Each Redwood Valley defender aimed steadily, not yet firing. The moment balanced on a razor's edge. Axel's fury twisted into a sneer. "So you think one sniper can scare us off?" He signaled his men to spread out, possibly to locate Jonathan's nest. Another bullet whizzed close to a second biker's shoulder, not hitting him but puncturing a metal sign. The message repeated, Redwood Valley wasn't bluffing. Cal Donovan snarled, scanning the rooftops. "They're controlling the vantage points," he warned. The bikers, accustomed to being the biggest threat, realized they faced prepared resistance. Townspeople huddled behind stalls, hearts hammering, yet an undercurrent of relief swept them. For the first time, Redwood Valley had shown the Steel Serpents that intimidation alone wouldn't suffice. Axel pointed at a group of farmers. "Step aside or you'll regret it." But they stayed put, emboldened by the silent guardian on the hill and the network of watchers. Sheriff Hayes, though tense, recognized an opening. He raised a megaphone. "Lay down your weapons or face arrest. We have vantage coverage and backup is en route." Axel spat onto the ground. "Backup? This dump can't muster real backup. But if you want war, we'll give it to you." Even as he spoke, doubt crept into his voice. Redwood Valley's discipline echoed military planning, and he wasn't sure how many more sharpshooters lurked unseen. A brief volley of shots rang out, some from the bikers, some from Redwood Valley defenders firing warning rounds into the air. Screams and the metallic clang of bullets glancing off steel frames resonated through the market. Shaking, Eliza crouched behind her stall, adrenaline surging. She glimpsed Harriet calmly reloading, Hank Billings motioning for watchers to shift positions. This was the controlled chaos Jonathan had prepared them for. Short, precise responses, minimal exposure, no wild firing. Axel growled orders to press forward, but each attempt was met by another precise shot that pinned his men down. They realized Redwood Valley's vantage points overlapped, leaving no safe path. The bikers faltered, scanning for an exit. Tension soared as Redwood Valley defenders hoped to avoid lethal damage if the Serpents backed down. In that charged standstill, the community's unity and Jonathan's training shone like a shield, daring the Serpents to test it further. A shifting wind carried dust across the standoff, and for a moment everyone stared at one another across the market's makeshift battlefield. Axel seemed torn between retreat and launching a full assault. Some bikers shouted suggestions: push through, flank them, or take hostages. Sheriff Hayes, bullhorn still in hand, repeated that state police were on their way. Though the Serpents might doubt Redwood Valley's law enforcement capacity, the arrival of backup would tip the scales decisively. Sensing the turning tide, Jonathan radioed Harriet, "Keep them pinned. If they attempt a breach, go for disabling shots." Redwood Valley's watchers were prepared to escalate only if forced. In truth, many residents had never fired a weapon at a person, but their resolve outmatched fear. They knew if they gave ground now, the Serpents would sink deeper into Redwood Valley soil, eventually crushing the town's spirit. Axel scanned the rooftops, frustration etched into his face. He barked at Cal Donovan. "Find that sniper." Cal nodded, gathering 2 men to slip around the perimeter. But Redwood Valley had thought of that. Another shot rang out near the orchard, halting the flanking attempt. Harriet and Hank coordinated to keep every angle covered. Even the orchard's thick foliage had watchers posted, their vantage commanding the approaches. Seizing the moment, Hayes ordered his deputies forward, slowly advancing in a wedge formation. One deputy, voice quivering but determined, shouted for the bikers to drop their weapons. A tense hush settled, then a single rifle crack overhead as a final warning. Several Serpents glanced at Axel, fear battling defiance. They had the numbers and guns, but Redwood Valley held the advantage of preparation, discipline, and local terrain. A furious scowl twisted Axel's lips. He muttered something about not finishing here, then signaled a reluctant fallback. Cal growled protests. "We can take them!" But Axel shook his head, reading the bigger picture. Redwood Valley had turned from unsuspecting farmland into a fortress. They might lose men if they pushed. The bikers began edging back toward their bikes, weapons still in hand, uncertain whether Redwood Valley would chase them. Jonathan watched through his scope as the Serpents regrouped. Part of him longed to force a surrender, but Redwood Valley didn't have the resources to hold prisoners. He also worried about triggering a full-scale firefight. When Axel revved his engine, motioning for the others, Jonathan exhaled. The Serpents wouldn't vanish forever, but Redwood Valley had won this round. Scowling, Axel raised 2 fingers in a mocking salute. "This isn't over," he yelled, voice echoing. Then the convoy roared off, leaving behind churned gravel, scattered produce, and a community breathless but unbroken. Eliza emerged, tears of relief brimming, as watchers lowered their rifles. Neighbors rushed to help each other. No one had died, though nerves were frayed to breaking. Sheriff Hayes exhaled a long-held breath, radioing an urgent update to the state police. Redwood Valley had weathered the storm's first strike, but all knew the Serpents might return in greater force. Yet the day's events proved Redwood Valley wasn't defenseless. Under Jonathan's guidance, they had withstood open intimidation, a fragile victory, but a victory nonetheless. The partial retreat of the Steel Serpents gave Redwood Valley a reprieve. In the following days, the tension lingered, but immediate confrontation eased. Federal agents began sniffing around after hearing reports of potential gunfire and a large biker presence. Sheriff Hayes supplied them with statements from residents who described demands for protection money and suspicious activity near the rail lines. Rumors circulated that the Serpents were linked to major smuggling rings. Redwood Valley's stand had caught official attention at last. Eliza and Jonathan took advantage of the lull to strengthen defenses. Jonathan worked with Harriet, Henry, and Hank to refine watch schedules and set new vantage points. In the orchard, they assembled hidden posts where watchers could remain unseen for longer periods. They also distributed shortwave radios to more families, ensuring no corner of Redwood Valley would lack communication. Dr. Ingrid Fowler restocked her clinic, bracing for potential casualties if the Serpents launched a bigger assault. The Parker farm turned into a strategic hub, with notes and maps pinned to a large corkboard in the barn. Jonathan systematically marked each Serpent sighting, analyzing patterns. He guessed Axel needed Redwood Valley's roads and farmland to funnel contraband. If Redwood Valley kept refusing to yield, the Serpents might attempt total takeover. It wouldn't just be extortion, it could be an occupation. Reflecting on his special forces background, Jonathan prepared for the worst, a small-town insurgency. Though no major conflicts occurred in the next week, the Serpents maintained a menacing presence. They cruised past schools, farmhouses, and supply stores. On a few nights, watch teams reported hearing vehicles prowling back roads. A sense of collective vigilance pervaded Redwood Valley. Even children understood a silent code. If you see unfamiliar bikes, get inside and lock the door. Some residents wondered if they should just leave town. Yet most stayed, not willing to abandon homes built over generations. One afternoon, a black SUV with tinted windows arrived at the old warehouse. From a distance, Harriet glimpsed men wearing dark jackets unload crates. Jonathan deduced it was a shipment of contraband, maybe weapons or drugs, waiting to be moved. Redwood Valley's interference had stalled the Serpents' plan, but not ended it. Fed-up local ranchers considered direct action. Storm the warehouse, drive them out. Jonathan cautioned restraint. A frontal attack would be suicide. We hold our ground and let law enforcement see how deep this goes. As the days stretched on, Redwood Valley fell into a bizarre rhythm, gathering intelligence, coordinating watchers, and living life as best they could. Markets reopened with cautious optimism. Families tried to reclaim normalcy, even as they looked over their shoulders. Eliza still sold produce, ignoring the occasional jeering biker who passed by. Children played in the fields, but adults kept them within sight. In hushed conversations, people spoke of Redwood Valley's transformation. It was no longer just farmland, but a community tested in the crucible of threat, tempered by unity. A second confrontation seemed inevitable, yet Redwood Valley's unwavering spirit burned brightly in every heart. Axel's patience snapped when he realized Redwood Valley wasn't backing down. He gathered reinforcements, a motley crew of hardened bikers, some rumored to have served in rogue militias or paramilitary groups. They arrived under cover of darkness, slipping into the old warehouse with extra weaponry. By daybreak, Redwood Valley watchers confirmed a larger force was assembling. Jonathan and Sheriff Hayes suspected an imminent showdown. Rumors spread that the Serpents planned a coordinated strike, aiming to seize the roads and key infrastructure. Redwood Valley responded in kind. On a chilly dawn, watchers took their stations. Some families left, seeking refuge in neighboring towns. Others insisted on staying, bolstered by Redwood Valley's sense of solidarity. Harriet Graham perched atop the school building with binoculars, scanning for dust clouds along the highway. Hank Billings manned a checkpoint on a back road, supported by a handful of ranchers. Dr. Fowler transformed a classroom into a makeshift infirmary, just in case. Eliza rose early, distributing fresh bread to volunteers. She saw fear flicker in their eyes, but also determination. Jonathan readied his old sniper rifle, stowing it in his truck. He hoped not to use it, but everything pointed to a larger assault. He told Eliza, "If it escalates, Redwood Valley must stand firm. We've shown them we can defend ourselves, and that's our best deterrent." That morning, a thunderous rumble signaled the Serpents' arrival en masse. Axel led dozens of bikes, backed by men in trucks who clearly carried heavier arms. Redwood Valley watchers relayed positions via radio. Convoy spotted on the East Road, another group on the west side. This pincer movement threatened to surround the town. Sheriff Hayes and his deputies scrambled to lock down intersections, blocking them with farm equipment. Community volunteers joined them, brandishing rifles and shotguns. In the center of Redwood Valley, near the market square, Eliza helped families take shelter behind fortified stalls. Harriet radioed urgent updates from her rooftop. Jonathan, stationed on a ridge beyond the orchard, observed the surging tide of bikes with practiced calm. He'd positioned Hank and Henry to cover side routes. Redwood Valley had turned every feature of its landscape into an asset. Sturdy barns for cover, orchard rows as concealed paths, irrigation ditches for flanking moves. When Axel's front line reached the town, the standstill felt electric. Guns glinted in the early sunlight. Axel bellowed, "Redwood Valley belongs to the Steel Serpents. Stand down or we'll tear this place apart." Sheriff Hayes, undeterred, aimed his sidearm. Not happening. In the silent beat that followed, Redwood Valley defenders made their presence known. Rifles angled from doorways, watchers peering from rooftops, and a tangible unity that defied any notion of surrender. Some Serpents revved engines in intimidation, but Redwood Valley held its ground. Jonathan, hidden away, calmly breathed, finger off the trigger but ready. He knew from experience that a single shot could change everything. The next moments would decide Redwood Valley's fate. Would it bend or remain unbreakable, even under the looming shadow of a more lethal threat? A single gunshot finally snapped the tension. One of Axel's men fired into the air, presumably to spark fear, but Redwood Valley had steeled itself. Watchers responded with disciplined blasts, targeting tires on the Serpents' vehicles or firing near their feet. Alarms of "shots fired" rang out over the radio. Dr. Fowler and a few assistants ducked behind improvised barricades preparing for casualties. Harriet's vantage let her pick off a Serpent aiming at the sheriff, striking the biker's arm. The wounded man howled, dropping his weapon. Chaos rippled across town. Some Serpents charged forward, only to be pinned by carefully placed crossfire. Others tried maneuvering through orchard rows, but found hidden defenders using the thick foliage. Jonathan played the role of guardian sniper. From his ridge, each measured shot disarmed or disabled a threat, halting them without unnecessary bloodshed. The plan was to show overwhelming defensive power, prompting the Serpents to surrender or retreat. Amid the firefight, Eliza guided terrified families into safer zones behind stacked hay bales and crates. She spotted a Serpent creeping near a supply truck, possibly to set it ablaze. Before he could act, Harriet's bullet ricocheted off the truck's metal frame, scattering him. Redwood Valley's synergy was evident. Each vantage fed into another, each resident aided the next. It was everything Jonathan had taught them: coordinated defense, minimal exposure, precise force. Axel, raging at the pushback, ordered a truck full of armed men to flank the main street, but the path was blocked by a tractor, and Hank Billings led a group to defend it. Gunfire erupted in short, controlled bursts. Several bikers retreated, stunned by the resistance. One shouted, "They fight like soldiers." Indeed, Redwood Valley, under Jonathan's guidance, had developed tactics reminiscent of a trained militia. After a tense hour, the Serpents' momentum stalled. Lying behind vehicles or walls, they weighed their dwindling chances. State police sirens wailed in the distance. Axel knew if law enforcement arrived in force, escape would be difficult. Over the radio, Jonathan urged Redwood Valley to hold position. Another series of controlled shots targeted engine blocks, immobilizing vehicles. Bikers who tried to flee found themselves under watchful crosshairs. Wounded or unarmed Serpents began surrendering, tossing guns aside. Axel, pinned near a battered truck, cursed relentlessly. "We'll return," he bellowed, but his defiance rang hollow. Redwood Valley had shattered the myth of easy conquest. As police cruisers barreled into view, the Serpents, who still could, started fleeing on foot or in half-ruined vehicles. Officers quickly apprehended stragglers, while Redwood Valley's watchers maintained vigil from rooftops and ridgelines. When the dust settled, Redwood Valley stood victorious. The orchard was scarred with bullet holes and the market stalls riddled with splintered wood. Yet the community endured, having protected its land and people from a determined paramilitary force. As paramedics treated injuries, both civilian and biker, Jonathan joined Eliza in the makeshift triage area. He removed his cap, relief etched in every line of his face. Their farmland was safe, Redwood Valley was intact, and though the Steel Serpents threat wasn't entirely erased, they had proven that unity and preparedness could fend off even the most dangerous foe. The fallout from the confrontation spread far beyond Redwood Valley. Federal authorities, now fully alert, seized the abandoned warehouse and uncovered the Serpents' illegal stockpiles: drugs, weapons, falsified shipping manifests. Agents interviewed townsfolk, who provided logs, photos, and statements documenting weeks of harassment. Sheriff Hayes handed over Axel and several high-ranking Serpents, charged with crimes from racketeering to attempted murder. News vans arrived, broadcasting Redwood Valley's stand to the wider world. Eliza watched the arrests with a mix of pride and lingering worry. The park across from the market, once littered with the Serpents' trash, now bustled with cleanup crews. Broken stalls were repaired and bullet holes patched in building walls. Neighbors, from store clerks to farmhands, worked side by side, proof that the town emerged stronger. Dr. Fowler treated a few minor scrapes and bruises, glad more people weren't badly hurt. Meanwhile, Jonathan and Harriet compiled all the intelligence Redwood Valley had gathered and gave it to federal investigators, who praised the town for disrupting a major criminal enterprise. The Steel Serpents had been wanted in multiple states, but evidence was scarce until Redwood Valley forced them to expose themselves. They underestimated a small town that refused to roll over, an agent told Jonathan. Though battered, Redwood Valley's spirit flourished. Children played freely in the orchard, unafraid of lurking bikers. The market stalls overflowed again with produce, and neighbors swapped stories of the standoff like new legends. The Parker farm, where so much planning took place, remained a favorite gathering spot. Evenings found volunteers recalling how a single warning shot altered everything, or how Harriet's aim from the school rooftop saved lives. Once order returned, Eliza and Jonathan reflected on their home's ordeal. They knew Redwood Valley had endured its own kind of war, subtle at first, then violent. Many communities might have collapsed under such pressure, but this town rose up, fortified by Jonathan's military training and the people's resolve. Standing among her thriving tomato rows, Eliza felt grateful that unity, not fear, shaped Redwood Valley's fate. As weeks passed, federal investigations expanded, toppling more pieces of the Serpents' network. Families who had fled returned to rebuild. At a small ceremony, Sheriff Hayes thanked every resident, commending Jonathan for his tactical guidance and Eliza for her steadfast coordination. "Sometimes a quiet place holds more strength than any outsider imagines," he said to cheers. In the end, Redwood Valley's greatest lesson was that committed neighbors and determined hearts can stand against even the most daunting threat. As Jonathan and Eliza strolled home beneath a luminous sunset, they felt renewed faith in the farmland that had become their sanctuary. Once known only for fertile soil, Redwood Valley was now also known for its unwavering courage and the will of ordinary folks who, when tested, revealed extraordinary bravery. Looking back on this entire story, I can't help but feel uplifted by the way an unassuming community stood tall against a fearsome threat. Yes, there were moments of anxiety and doubt, but more importantly, there was unity, hope, and a readiness to protect what mattered most. From rooftop lookouts to homemade barricades, every neighbor played a part, proving that real strength is forged in togetherness. Now that the dust has settled, Redwood Valley is a shining example of how people who stand side by side can overcome almost anything. They did more than drive off danger. They rediscovered the bond that makes a town feel like family. What do you think? Would you have joined in their defense or handled things differently? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. I look forward to hearing your ideas, and remember to subscribe to Farmer's Story for more engaging adventures and heartwarming tales.